All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Court Tompkins. I'm the CTO here at IP Configure, and we're going to spend a few minutes to talk about what is new in the latest release of Orchid VMS, and that is version 24.6. You'll notice on the Zoom call there is a Q&A section, so if you've got any questions as I'm talking, please don't hesitate to throw a question in the Q&A, and we'll go through those at the end. All right, so yeah, Orchid VMS 24.6 was recently released. Just as a refresher, Orchid VMS is a family of products. There's a recording server that we call Orchid Recorder, then a management server that you use to access all of your locations together in one interface. Depending on the deployment model, that might be called Orchid Fusion, it might be called Orchid Hybrid. It's all part of the Orchid VMS family, and everything that we're going to talk about in this release presentation applies to all of those products. There are a few enterprise features that are only available through the management interface that aren't going to be available if you are using the Orchid Recorder interface. I'll highlight those. All right, so just as a quick refresher, Orchid Recorder is really the NVR software. So in a large multi-site architecture, Orchid Recorder is the software that's running at each individual, school or factory or restaurant or warehouse. And then Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid is the management software that either runs in IP Configure's cloud or runs in your data center. In a typical model, most of your users will only access the management software, only access Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid, but we do have a number of customers where folks access the NVR directly through the Orchid Recorder interface. Again, it's really the same experience. There's just a few more features in the enterprise interface. All right, so a number of sort of big new features were released in Orchid VMS 24.6. The first is Talkdown support. So Talkdown goes by a couple of other names. It might be called bidirectional audio. It's also called two-way audio. And this is the ability for VMS users to send audio to a speaker that's connected to a camera so that you can communicate with or shout at people from across the building, city, country, world. So often used for giving warnings, giving announcements, those sorts of things. Orchid VMS being entirely browser-based, this feature is also browser-based, which means it is supported through any microphone that is accessible to your web browser. So just like the Zoom conference that I'm on right now, as long as your web browser has access to a microphone, then I can use that microphone to send audio down to a camera. So let's take a look at what that interface looks like. I'm going to go to IP Configure's Orchid Hybrid demo server here. I'm going to open up what we call our camera bag here on the side, and I am going to search for a camera here on our demo system that I know has a speaker attached and has this Talkdown feature enabled. So if I look at this player here in the top left part of our stage, you'll see that in the header there is now a microphone icon. That's because this camera supports Talkdown and Talkdown has been enabled. So I will click that microphone icon and you'll see that I now have some controls on the bottom of the player. Let me go full screen here so we can see this a little better. And with those Talkdown controls enabled, you can see that I can do a couple of things. I've got a gear icon here, so I can select which microphone I want to use. So for example, on this computer, I've got a couple of microphones. I've got a microphone that's attached to my webcam, and I also have a headset microphone. So let's say I want to send audio to this camera with a headset microphone. And of course, this setting is going to be remembered across multiple cameras. Now to send audio down through this camera, I'm muted by default. I can unmute myself. You'll notice that the border around the camera goes red. I've got a talk activity indicator here in the top left, so I can see that I'm talking, and now we are transmitting audio out of the microphone that is attached to this camera. So that's it. That is the Talkdown feature. In terms of how that audio gets transmitted, cameras have a couple of different ways of doing that. A camera that supports Talkdown will often have a line out, like a microphone or speaker connection out on the camera itself. So that's a sort of a standard way to send audio out of a camera. Also, a lot of camera manufacturers support network speakers. So if I have an Axis camera and pair it with an Axis network speaker, or a Hanwha camera paired with a Hanwha network speaker, that works as well. And the reason that works as well is because Orchid uses, and let me go back to my slide deck here. Orchid uses the OnVIF Profile T protocol for sending audio to cameras using this talkdown feature. That means that this feature is widely supported on nearly all modern cameras because we're using the standard OnVIF Profile T spec. We're using a particular part of the OnVIF Profile T spec, which is called the audio back channel. We found that some cameras do purport to support OnVIF Profile T, but don't have this audio back channel support that's used for sending audio to the camera. We've done a lot of internal testing prior to this release. We can confirm that this feature works with modern Axis cameras with an 8.5 firmware or greater, Hanwha cameras, Bosch cameras, Vivitech cameras, and this is not an inclusive list. Again, any camera that supports OnVIF Profile T with this audio back channel will work with Talkdown in Orchid 24.6. iPro cameras behave a little bit differently, so we don't yet support iPro cameras. That's sort of the one exception of this list, although expect to add talkdown support for them soon. From a protocol standpoint, this talkdown feature requires a WebRTC browser connection. WebRTC is the web standard that Orchid uses to transmit video with or receive video with really low latency, and we use that WebRTC connection to transmit audio. An HTTP API for sending audio through our web server is coming soon. Orchid's APIs are publicly accessible. They're well documented, and the WebRTC mechanism for sending audio through the back channel, if you're an API user doing your own integration, that's documented. That's available today. There's not yet an HTTP API. That will come soon. All right, so a little more fine print. The Talkdown permission is now a new ability that can be configured in the Orchid Fusion or Orchid Hybrid permissions interface. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. I'm going to go back to my Orchid Hybrid demo site. I will open up a permission group here. Let's just pick a fake permission group here at random. I'm going to edit this group and edit the settings that are associated with this permission group. So this is the access to Orchid Hybrid that any Orchid users in this permission group would get. And now with 24.6, we have the ability to give a user the ability to talk via camera. So to send audio to a connected speaker on that camera. So in this example, I have a permission group that has access to live video, PTZ control, and now talkdown ability on all cameras and servers that are attached to this Orchid Hybrid interface. If you select all, that also includes talk. So now that we have talkdown support, this talk ability is new. We also have the ability to enable and disable talk at the camera level. So I'm going to go into my cameras list here for this server. I will expand the configuration panel for this camera, and I also have the ability to turn this talkdown feature on and off globally for the camera. For example, maybe a camera has a built-in speaker. I don't want anybody using that built-in speaker. I can disable talkdown at the camera level as well as using those permission groups. All right, so that is permissions and talkdown. A little more building on audio within Orchid. This is something new that's in 24.6. Orchid Recorder administrators now have stronger control over the recording of audio at the server level through a new property. It's one of the advanced settings properties that's available in the Orchid Recorder admin interface. So previously, Orchid Recorder would record any audio that a camera sent to it. We had the ability to turn off audio entirely. We now have a new strict mode. And we have this strict mode because we have found that there are certain cameras that will misbehave even if audio is disabled at the OnVIF level. You know, if I look at my settings in Orchid and audio is disabled and Orchid has told the camera to disable audio, we have some cameras that will transmit audio regardless. So we now have a new strict mode. You can configure your Orchid Recorder to only record audio if audio is configured by OnVIF. So if a camera sends you audio anyway, we're going to automatically drop that audio. This is obviously important for big organizations that have Orchid Recorders across multiple jurisdictions. You've got, one-party consent and two-party consent states for recording audio. So A lot of organizations want to make sure they don't get that wrong, don't accidentally record audio in a two-party state. And again, we also have the ability to just never record audio. Doesn't matter if we receive audio, doesn't matter if the camera is configured to record audio. You can disable audio entirely at the server level now. Again, I think there's probably some big organizations that don't want to have to worry about what jurisdiction a particular server is in. They know they don't want audio, and we now have the ability to just turn audio off across the board. All right, another big feature in 24.6 is an enhancement to the way Smart Search works. So if you recall, Smart Search is a ability in Orchid where I can draw a box and Orchid will really quickly, almost instantaneously, only show me motion events that happen within that region, within where I drew the box. So beginning in 24.6, we can now get that region information from ONVIF metadata events. So using camera side motion detection. Before 24.6, Orchid Smart Search relied on Orchid's own internal motion detection algorithms, but we can now push that work off to modern cameras, let them do the motion detection, tell Orchid about the regions where motion was detected, and use that data for Smart Search. This is a feature that's broadly compatible with newer cameras. Again, in our testing, we found that it worked with, or we can confirm that it works with Axis firmwares greater than 9.0, modern Hanwha cameras, iPro cameras, Bosch, Vivitech, some others. It's got to be a camera that obviously supports camera side motion detection. But the big benefit of this feature is reduced CPU and memory footprints for Orchid recorder servers, because we can now push this motion detection processing out to the edge, out to the cameras, and you don't need as much compute and processing on your Orchid recorder to still have this really cool Smart Search capability within the Orchid interface. So let's go back to our demo server here. I will, just to show you there is nothing up my sleeve, I am going to look at the server list and I am going to look at this assembly benches camera. So this is a camera looking over one of our SteelFin server assembly benches. I'm going to edit the camera stream settings for this camera, and you will see that it is configured to use camera side motion detection. This happens to be an Axis camera, so the camera event that we're listening to is the VMD, the Axis Video Motion Detection event. So this is a camera that is using camera side motion detection, and if I bring it up on the Orchid stage, we should be able to see that Orchid Smart Search is working on this camera, despite the fact that Orchid is not doing any of the motion detection. It's all camera events that we're using for motion. So I'm going to go full screen on this camera. Let me go back in time, and let's say that, around noon today, we're concerned about some suspicious activity on one of our configuration racks here. So you see I drew that Smart Search region. We instantly filtered our motion events here at the bottom of the timeline bar, and now I can look and see that indeed we've got some activity around that server. And yeah, there's our nefarious activity, somebody behind the rack. So again, the cool new thing here is that Orchid is not doing any of that processing. That's all processing that happened on the camera. And we're listening to those events through ONVIF, gathering that ONVIF metadata. All right, so that Smart Search now capable of using camera side motion events. You also have some additional logging and information and visibility into these ONVIF metadata events. I think if as you're listening to this talk, and hopefully you join us for talks later on in the year, you'll see that ONVIF metadata and processing analytics is really going to be a theme for IP Configure over the next few releases. So Orchid's camera settings page now gives us feedback and allows administrators to confirm that, yes, we are indeed receiving ONVIF data from the camera, that we're receiving those metadata events. So it's useful for verifying that your Orchid recorder server is actually getting these motion events and other types of events from the camera, and it feeds into a forthcoming triggers and action system for metadata processing that you're going to start seeing in Orchid over the next few releases. So we'll take a look at what that looks like again from the administrator perspective. I'm back in the Orchid hybrid demo system. I'm looking at my server settings page. I am going to scroll down to this assembly benches camera we're talking about. And as an administrator, if I expand the recording statistics setting, you'll see that we've got our packet loss recording statistics that Orchid's had for quite some time. And if I scroll farther down, you see we now also get some information about camera metadata, and I can confirm that we are receiving OnVIF analytics, OnVIF motion, and OnVIF event data. And I can confirm when the last event I received was, so that as an administrator, I have sort of the warm fuzzy that yes, this camera is sending OnVIF metadata and Orchid is receiving and understanding it. All right, so again, sort of a complementary enhancement to the camera side smart search. A third big feature in 24.6 is the ability to disable cameras. So not a groundbreaking concept, but I think it really adds a lot of usability for Orchid administrators, for enterprises in terms of managing cameras that are either going offline, need to be replaced, are only for temporary use. So at a high level, administrators, rather than deleting a camera entirely, they can now disable cameras. And a disabled camera in Orchid behaves a lot like an offline camera, except it's labeled as disabled everywhere in the interface. Recorded video can still be viewed from that camera, but disabled cameras do not consume one of your Orchid camera licenses. So the benefits here is that customers who are replacing cameras, maybe because the camera is being upgraded, maybe the camera has failed and it's just being RMA'd and replaced, these disabled cameras give you much better workflows because you don't have to delete a camera and then lose access to your footage. You can mark that camera as disabled. I can still view previously recorded footage on that camera, but with the camera disabled, that has freed up my license, and I can use that additional extra license to install the new replacement camera. IP Configure has supported these sorts of workflows before. It involved getting in touch with our super friendly tech support team here on the other side of the office. But now with disabled cameras, you can manage those workflows yourself without having to talk to us. There's also some use cases, I think, around temporary cameras that folks might use for special events. They can turn those cameras on when they need them, disable them when they're not being used. So let's take a look at what disabling a camera looks like. So let's see, I've got this camera here at the top of the list, 202.107. It's a camera, it's enabled, it's recording. Let me scroll back up here. You'll see that I have 87 cameras enabled on this server out of 100 that it's licensed for. If I disable this camera, the camera will stop recording. You'll notice that the license count now shows that I only have 86 cameras out of 100 cameras used. So that means one of those camera licenses has been freed up. If this camera had failed, I could use that additional license now to install a replacement camera. But if I go back to the stage, you'll see that this camera is still available to me for viewing recorded video. Got a little disabled icon on the camera here to tell me that it's disabled. If I add it to the stage, live video won't work, of course, because the camera is disabled, but the previous recordings are still there. So that is disabled cameras. New in Orchid 24.6. So again, kind of a nice quality of life improvement for Orchid administrators. I think this might be the final big new feature in 24.6 is retention caps. So we're looking at the estimated retention page for a Orchid Recorder server. This is where I go to configure how many days of retention I want each camera to get on my recording server. And previously, Orchid Recorder allowed administrators to configure certain cameras to get more than their fair share of retention. So by default, if I have 12 cameras on a server, Orchid will manage the archive such that all 12 of those cameras gets the same number of days of retention. Before 24.6, I could single one of those cameras out to get more retention. Let's say I've got a camera looking at a cash register or something. I've got PCI compliance issues. I need to guarantee that that camera gets at least 90 days of retention. I could do that. Orchid would guarantee that that camera gets 90 days. The remaining cameras would get what's left, that would be equally distributed among them. But before 24.6, I could not pull that retention in and say that I've got a camera where I only want it to record 5 days of video. If there were additional space available on the server, that camera would record more than 5 days. That has now changed in 24.6. I can set a cap on the amount of retention that a camera gets. So this has a couple of different benefits. Legal compliance in certain jurisdictions is probably the most notable one. Not sure if any US American jurisdictions have this, but there's certainly places in Europe where there are regulations or laws which would restrict the amount of video surveillance I am allowed to retain. Maybe I can only retain 2 weeks of video surveillance. With 24.6, it's now really easy to manage that in Orchid. I can go in and say, oh, never want more than 14 days of retention for any of my cameras, regardless of how much disk space we have available. Orchid will make sure that you never have more than 14 days. We also have some people who've expressed interest in this feature out of an ability to provide sort of clear, unambiguous service levels to their internal customers. So IP Configure has a lot of large enterprise customers where there might be one organization that's sort of maintaining the video surveillance system. That's often IT, and another part of the organization who's the end user, right? Maybe loss prevention or security or campus police, for example. It's often useful for IT or the system owner to be able to just very clearly say to their end user, we've got exactly 60 days of retention across all of our servers. Probably gets a little muddy if we say, well, we know that you've got at least 60 days. Sometimes it might be 70, sometimes it might be 75. There's a benefit to just say, we never want more than 60 days of retention. We'll guarantee you have 60 days of retention exactly. It's a little bit clearer message for your internal customer. So that's probably a lesser use case than the legal compliance use case, but that is another one. So let's go back to the Orchid Hybrid demo site. Take a look at one kind of important consideration on setting a retention policy. So this is new within 24.6. I have the ability to set a lower retention policy. So for example, if I look at a camera that is going to get about 12 days of retention on this particular server, and I change its retention to 5 days, I only want this camera to have a 5-day cap. Well, this camera already has 12 days of footage that's available on the server. So as soon as I click save, Orchid is going to immediately start deleting a lot of footage, in this case, 6.58 days. So we now have this new confirmation dialog to confirm that, hey, if you save this retention policy, we're going to immediately blow away a whole lot of video. So a little safeguard there in the UI, and that also exists at the API level. All right, so that's retention caps. Getting into some smaller features that were released in 24.6. In the previous release, Orchid included the ability to automatically configure software update repositories for Ubuntu, popular variety of Linux that IP Configure supports. We've now expanded that to also include Red Hat and CentOS. That's probably the second most popular variety of Linux that IP Configure supports. You'll see this trend continue in future releases. We want to get these automated updates working with all of our operating systems that we support, including Windows. So with this release, we've added support for Red Hat in addition to Ubuntu Linux. This is another gradual feature that's had some enhancements in the 24.6 release. Player performance gathering. So the Orchid user interface now gathers and saves information about users' viewing experience. So basic information is available in the player statistics view. We'll take a look at that on the demo site here in a second. And more advanced information is also logged internally and accessible via the API. IP Configure uses that to provide some quality assurance on sites that we host. System administrators have access to that data as well through the API. And the idea is that IP Configure needs to make sure, and administrators want to make sure that all of their users have an environment where when they need their video is available, and their video is available quickly. So if I go back to the IP Configure stage here, we can bring up the statistics feature. That's the little bar graph icon here on the player header. And we can see information about things like packet loss and dropped frames. That's been available in Orchid for quite some time. We also have some new statistics. The metric that we're really interested in is the time to first frame. So that is when I load a player on the stage, how long does it take me to start seeing video? In this case, 393 milliseconds. That's pretty good. We're happy with that. But this information is also being tracked within Orchid so that if we see through our monitoring that we've got a site, we've got a user where on average it's taking 2,000 milliseconds, 2 seconds for video to start playing. There's an issue there. We need to be able to act on that and report on that. So this is the sort of statistics, sort of information gathering that we want to ensure that users have good experiences. So we've kind of laid the groundwork for that feature in 24.6. More to come there for sure. All right, so that was it. That is everything that's new in Orchid 24.6. Coming up, maybe in 24.9, but certainly soon, we've got a few new features. The first that we'll definitely see sooner rather than later is we will have a new way to use Samle attributes for defining permission groups. So Samle is the standards protocol that we use for single sign-on. So again, if you're an enterprise user who signs in with your Microsoft account or your Ping account or your Okta account, you're using Samle single sign-on with Orchid. And before 24. Well, it's going to be 24.6.1 or 24.9 before the next release. Administrators had to give access to Orchid Hybrid based on which group a user was in. So that group is a concept that's been around for a long time with systems like Active Directory. End users were placed in specific groups. The problem comes around if you've got a large enterprise where you have thousands of locations, maybe you have different user types at each location. Maybe I've got a manager, I've got a staff member, I've got a security officer. If I want to give granular access and make sure that folks at one location only have access to their location, not to the entire enterprise, that ends up being a tremendous amount of Active Directory groups that I would have to create for my organization. And again, if you kind of recall back to that conversation we had a few minutes ago about an internal organization providing access to video surveillance for a different internal organization, it's often maybe a little challenging for a loss prevention group to go to IT and say, hey, I need 10,000 new Active Directory groups. That can be challenging. So in the next release, we will now have the ability for administrators to use additional what are called Samle attributes that are tied to people's accounts. So these Samle attributes might define things like your job role, whether you're a manager, whether you're a loss prevention officer. They might define which store number you're in, which region you're in, which district you're in. So administrators will now have the ability to provide access to Orchid resources, cameras and servers, and set up permission groups using those additional attributes, using things more than just what Active Directory groups are you in. That's the basic idea. So really important feature for our big enterprise customers. We're excited to make that available very soon. And again, in the 24.9 release, in probably several releases to come, not exclusively, but our big focus is going to be making Orchid events more searchable and more actionable with triggers and actions. And really the key focus for us moving forward is making bulk configuration and administration a key focus. So Orchid's event system already gives you the ability to see analytics events, right? To see on-VIF metadata that's generated by cameras, but we now want to make that metadata actionable and easy to configure. So we're looking at things like tagging mechanisms, ways that administrators can easily set up on-VIF events across mixed environments. So for example, maybe you're a big retailer and you've got a combination of access cameras, Hanwha cameras, maybe some legacy encoders. We want administrators to be able to go into Orchid Hybrid and set up analytics that are going to do person detection on all of the lobby cameras, and between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., anytime a person is detected, send an email alert out. Those sorts of things, and we need to make that configuration and setup really easy across these complicated mixed environments. So that's not all going to happen in one release. That's not all going to be here for the 24.9 release presentation, but that's where we're headed. That's absolutely our focus. All right. So that's it for Orchid 24.6. If you have any additional questions, we've got a lot of resources available online for you. We have free online training at training.ipconfigure.com. We've got great user manuals at manuals.ipconfigure.com. We've got a terrific support team here in Norfolk, Virginia, on the other side of the office from me. They are available by telephone. The toll-free numbers listed there on this slide. We also have a ticket system. You can put in a ticket, interact with those folks by email. All right, so that is all I've got. I do believe we have a few Q&A questions. So yeah, let me run through these really quick. So gentleman asked, is there an existing list of specific access cameras that are verified against the Talkdown feature? Yeah, so we have done extensive testing across tons of different access camera models, and that firmware version 8.5 or above is very consistent. So we'll make sure that that information is posted on our support page, on our knowledge base article. Definitely talk to our support team, support.ipconfigure.com, if you have any questions there. But if it's an access camera that supports audio out, has an audio out jack, and it's firmware 8.5 or above, it's going to work. Let's see more on Talkdown. So when upgrading, if the all permission is previously set, will it automatically turn on the talk feature? The answer is yes, it will. But the talk feature also, in that case, has to be enabled on the camera. So if you're upgrading and you've got a camera that supports talk, you're going to have to go in and turn talk on that camera. Hopefully that makes sense. Obviously, if you're an enterprise and you've got tons of cameras that maybe already have speakers built into them, we don't want to open the floodgates and have all of your users automatically have access to Talkdown on all of those cameras. You'll have to turn Talkdown on. Once Talkdown's turned on, if they have the all permission in an Orchid Fusion or hybrid permission group, they will get that talk access. Let's see, there's another question here. Can you use two-way audio in the mobile app? And the answer is yes. Yep. So two-way audio will work, again, because it's one of the great benefits of being browser-based like Orchid is. We're able to tap into all of that sort of really robust browser infrastructure that exists. And so your web browser has access to the microphone on your phone. And when you activate the microphone on a Talkdown capable camera, if you're on your phone, you'll be able to talk into your phone. Let's see, someone has asked if you would like to use two-way audio with a third-party mic and speaker. Does it have to be connected to the camera directly, or can we connect it to the Orchid in VR? So if it's an analog microphone, that's got to be plugged into a camera. Camera's got to have that jack, obviously. But most of your major manufacturers do have network speakers. So definitely Axis and Hanwha and iPro and all those big folks will generally have network speakers. You go into your camera interface, you can link the camera with that network speaker, and Orchid Talkdown will work then with that linked network camera, or network speaker, excuse me. So that's great for cameras that maybe don't have an audio out jack, but you still want to use the Talkdown support. It's also nice because it allows you to place the camera and the speaker in different places. If I've got a big courtyard, I could easily have the camera on one side of the courtyard, the speaker on the other side of the courtyard. If it's a network speaker, I don't have to worry about running an extra cable. I just have the Ethernet cable for the speaker. Okay, so let's see. Somebody has asked, while doing Talkdown, does the system record Talkdown? No, it doesn't. That is something that we considered during the development phase of this feature. If that's something that's useful to you, absolutely, please let your salesperson or our support team know. Yeah, something we might eventually add in if the demand is there. Let's see, somebody has asked, can you have pre-recordings stored so Talkdown happens every 30 minutes? Some message, for example, we are observing the building through cameras. That is possible through the API. It's not a feature that's built into Orchid Hybrid yet. If you wanted to use write your own integration, you can certainly do that. Again, if somebody has that use case, you'd like to be able to configure recordings based on some periodic interval to be played back. Yeah, love to hear about that use case. So somebody asked, for smart search, does the customer have to set up cameras for motion, or will that be done by the VMS? So yeah, I think I understand here. Sort of, is smart search on by default with camera side motion detection? The answer is not yet. Orchid's default mode for motion detection is still to use the Orchid server for motion detection. I would expect over the next few releases, again, this is part of our initiative around OnVIF and metadata and analytics, we will flip that default so that by default, Orchid is going to use camera motion rather than server side motion. Somebody has asked, for disabling cameras, how long will recorded video be available on the hard drive? So it's all based on your retention settings. So the previously recorded video for a disabled camera is going to stick around based on your retention duration, the same as if that camera were still live. So if I have enough storage on a server that each camera can record for 90 days and I disable one of my cameras, that video is going to stay around for 90 days until the cameras that are still enabled have enough new recordings to sort of push all of that previously recorded video off the hard drive. Hopefully that makes sense, but the idea is once a camera is disabled, its video hangs out just like any other camera until it gets old enough to be deleted. How do I know if my camera is ONVIF compliant and supports ONVIF S and ONVIF T compatibility to work with Orchid VMS? Yep. So if you go to the ONVIF website, there is an ONVIF conformant section there, and all of the camera manufacturer brands are listed. You can search if a camera is ONVIF conformant. And again, we need both the Profile S and the Profile T option to be supported for Talkdown. Let's see, am I able to map camera audio talkdown feature to an external IP device? Yep, I think we talked about that. Yes. Somebody has asked, with the talkdown feature, will whoever is on the other end of the camera be able to talk back, like with the Ring doorbell? So the answer is yes, but if your camera is recording audio, has a microphone built into it, certainly you can send audio down to the camera. Person on the other side of the camera will hear it. And then if they talk, the camera's microphone will pick it up and you as the operator will hear it. So yes, that will work. There is quite a bit of latency in that connection though. That's something built into this standards-based ONVIF Profile T protocol that's used for Talkdown. So it's not low latency like a phone conversation. It's not a video conferencing solution. It can be done, but there might be a second or two of latency. So bidirectional communication is definitely possible, but it's not built for bidirectional communication. Let's see. So when you disable a camera and free up a license, what is the process to add a camera to that freed license? Yeah, so that is basically as soon as a camera is disabled, the license that it's using is now up for grabs. So all you have to do is disable a camera, and I now have an additional license. So if I have a 16 camera Orchid license, I have all 16 cameras in use on the server. If I disable the 16th camera, I now have a free license. I can use that and register a 17th camera. Of course, that 17th camera will be active. One of my original 16 cameras will be disabled. Let's see. And final question here, would retention caps be automatically applied in countries that have limits legally? No, definitely not at this time. Again, if you have that use case, please definitely share that with your salesperson, with our tech support team. I would imagine even in countries that have those sorts of limitations, I'm not a lawyer, but it's my understanding those sorts of limitations are mostly around recording the public. So I might have a 14-day limit on recording people in the lobby of my restaurant, but maybe there's another user in that same country who's recording his saltwater fish tank. There's probably no legal limit on the amount of video that user can retain. So we wouldn't necessarily want to bake that limit in. We want users to be able to configure what their limits are. All right. So I think that's all I've got for today. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Again, if you want to know more about anything you've heard here, please reach out to your friendly IP Configure salesperson. Give us a shout at the telephone number or support link on the page. All right. Thanks a lot.